The morning of June 3, 1989 seemed like any other for Julio Centeno, a taxi driver by profession. Like every day, he drove through the streets of Lima in his white Volkswagen looking for passengers. Just before 10 a.m. as he arrived at the intersection of Javier Prado and Guardia Civil, a woman signaled and asked for a ride to Tupac Amaru School in San Luis. It was just an ordinary ride, nothing out of the ordinary, but it was actually a trap. When they arrived at the school, the woman got out of the taxi and opened the door completely to let two men in. One of them pulled out a gun and aimed it, but not at Julio. Under threat of death, he was forced to drive to the back of the school. There, they injected him with a sedative and left him almost unconscious on the street. While he struggled to stay awake, the three criminals took control of his car and headed toward downtown Lima. They weren't after the vehicle or money. Their destination was Giron Junín. Their real target was waiting there. Everything was planned. They knew the ceremony took place at noon. Like every day, the Hussars of Junín, that historic cavalry unit of the army in charge of the presidential escort and honor guard, would perform the traditional changing of the guard at the government palace. But they knew something else. Two military buses would leave in advance from the Barbones barracks in El Agustino. The first would transport the personnel in charge of the relief along with officers of the presidential escort. The second, the farandola of the Hussars of Junín, the musical band that accompanied every ceremony. It was a perfect routine, perfectly predictable. That morning, both vehicles moved through the streets of downtown Lima following their usual route. When suddenly, on Block 11 of Giron Junín near the Virgen del Carmen Church, something interrupted their journey. A white Volkswagen Beetle blocked the road, the same one stolen from taxi driver Julio Centeno just hours earlier. The two men who threatened him with a gun pretended to push the car, while the woman who set the trap acted like she was trying to start it from inside. At first glance, it looked like a mechanical failure, just another incident in a city used to chaos, traffic, and unexpected events. But after a few seconds, the act started to fall apart. One of the soldiers watched closely and noticed something strange, something that didn't fit. He had seen terrorism up close too many times to blindly believe in coincidences, and he was right. It wasn't an accident. They weren't just ordinary criminals either. Convinced of his suspicions, the soldier got out of the vehicle and fired several shots into the air as a warning. But it was already too late. The ambush was underway. A few meters away, another terrorist had started the next phase of the plan. Disguised as a recycler, he moved toward the first military bus, pushing a tricycle. Inside, he was carrying what appeared to be a box of cookies that actually concealed about 20 kilos of dynamite, half of it Clemexa type, reinforced with aluminum powder. When he reached the agreed point, he handed the box over to two other accomplices. Everything happened with precision. One of them lit the fuse, the other one rolled the explosive box under the first of the buses. Then they started running. The other terrorist did the same. Everything happened in a matter of seconds when suddenly the explosion violently shook Giron Junín. The shockwave hit the bus with devastating force. Some hussars were thrown out along with the seats through the windows. Others were trapped among the twisted metal of the destroyed vehicle. The survivors, with serious bruises and ruptured eardrums, desperately tried to help their comrades who were still alive, but there was no time. The bus began to catch fire. A thick column of smoke rose over downtown Lima as the flames quickly engulfed the structure. Witnesses remember a heartbreaking scene from inside the vehicle. Cries for help could be heard, which gradually faded away in the fire. "Get me out of here," they pleaded, but it was impossible. The attack left 6 soldiers dead and more than 30 wounded. The terrorists escaped in different directions amid the chaos. According to testimonies, some took refuge in the house located at 840 Huanta Street, just 3 blocks from the attack, while the person responsible for throwing the explosive fled down Huánuco Street. There, a white car was waiting for him, ready to escape, but on his way he crossed paths with Sergeant Johnny Ugarte Valdivia of the Technical Police, 26 years old, who upon realizing what had happened, reacted immediately. Without waiting for backup, he confronted him and opened fire. He managed to wound him in the arm, and as he tried to subdue him, another Shining Path member appeared from behind and shot him directly in the head. The tragedy claimed another victim, and they all escaped. Shining Path, the operation was a resounding success. The terrorist organization was in full expansion and acted with increasing violence and audacity. Their goal for 1989 was as ambitious as it was dangerous: to further weaken a Peruvian state already suffocated by hyperinflation. to encircle Lima and prepare the conditions for the thaw. In just a few months, they had killed police officers, journalists, leaders, politicians, and representatives of the state. Now it was the turn of the Hussars of Junin, one of the most emblematic units of the Peruvian army, and that carried a symbolic weight impossible to ignore. They were the Presidential Guard, the custodians of one of the country's most emblematic military traditions, heirs to a history that goes back to the wars of independence, to the building of Peru as a republic. That's why the attack had also been a public humiliation, a direct blow to the prestige of the armed forces and to the image of a government that seemed increasingly unable to contain the advance of terrorist violence. If Sendero could strike the Presidential Guard itself in the very heart of Lima, then no one was completely safe. The sense of vulnerability spread quickly. That made an increasingly strong conviction take hold within the military and intelligence sectors. If Shining Path operated from the shadows, then the state had to learn to find them in their own hideouts and show no mercy. It was no longer enough to react after each attack. They had to act preemptively, identify their members, unravel their networks, and strike before they could attack again. It was in that context that the so-called Spiderweb Plan began to take shape, also known as the Mobile Operational Plan. Its objective was clear: to identify and monitor, and then dismantle the logistical support, indoctrination, and annihilation cells that Sendero Luminoso had managed to establish in the most populated sectors of downtown Lima and in the peripheral neighborhoods of the capital. The idea was simple in theory, but extremely dangerous in practice. It was no longer enough to chase terrorists. You had to live among them. So the first phase of the operation would be infiltration, also known as blending in, and it consisted of placing intelligence agents inside the very environments where the enemy, Shining Path, hid and operated. The objective was to obtain accurate information before striking. One of the men chosen for this mission was Douglas Arteaga Pascual, 40 years old. To protect his true identity, they would call him Abadia. His designation was no coincidence. Abadia had spent many years working as an undercover agent for the Army's intelligence services. He was known as a spy, patient, disciplined, and with a remarkable ability to adapt to any environment, a true chameleon. But this time, the mission would be different, much more dangerous, since a small mistake could mean death. Every detail had to be handled with precision. So they set him up in a human settlement in Villa El Salvador, where he would completely assume a new life. He would work as a street vendor during the nights and during the day. He would actively participate in the assemblies of the self-managed community in the district, mingling among neighborhood leaders, activists, and local residents, and then return to his modest home made of reeds and wood. The facade had to be impeccable. Nothing could seem rehearsed. Nothing could look forced, nor arouse suspicion. That's how the first months went by, and little by little he began to fit in, without rushing, without showing anxiety, without drawing attention. He listened more than he spoke, observed more than he asked. He memorized names, relationships, routines, behaviors. Every conversation could contain a clue. Every contact could lead him to someone more important, who would bring him one step closer to his true goal. That persistence eventually opened doors for him. Through his neighborhood activities, he came into contact with a left-wing NGO that eventually allowed him to get closer to political groups linked to Patria Roja and the Unified Mariateguist Party, also known as the PUM. It was exactly the kind of environment he needed to reach Mission. It was there that he met a bone setter who worked at the Central Market, a seemingly ordinary person, but who would end up being a key figure in his mission. Over time, they developed a close friendship. They shared long conversations about politics, about the situation the country was going through, about the neglect by the state, and the different paths that could transform Peru. Dia never rushed these conversations. He let them grow naturally, until one day, after months of getting closer, the man confessed what he already suspected. He had ties with circles close to Shining Path. Dia immediately understood the importance of that revelation and continued to cultivate that relationship with patience and caution until it finally happened. The bone setter decided to introduce him to his contacts. The infiltration had just entered a new stage. He had managed to enter the environment where the real Shining Path militants operated. However, Getting in was. From that moment on, the tests began. The terrorists carefully investigated every person who tried to approach the organization. They checked compared stories, and examined every detail of the new contacts' personal histories. They left nothing to chance. They knew perfectly well that the intelligence agencies would sooner or later try to infiltrate their ranks. That's why they subjected Abadia to constant scrutiny. Every word was evaluated, every reaction was observed. They even used a series of psychological games to detect possible infiltrators. They would repeat the same questions days or weeks later to check if the answers changed. They looked for contradictions, hesitations. Couldn't afford any. He knew that any mistake, any carelessness, no matter how small, could cost him his. While he passed each of those tests, he continued to carry out his real mission. Every 15 or 20 days, he delivered reports to the intelligence apparatus. He reported names, aliases, internal structures, methods of organization, and planned attacks. Little by little, he began to understand how the clandestine machinery worked from the inside. He listened to their conversations, learned their codes, and walked among their members. Until after many months, he finally got what he had been looking for. The absolute trust of Shining Path. It was then that his success was confirmed. One night, Abadia was taken to one of the so-called people's schools. It was a modest house made of reeds, built on a hill. Darkness almost completely enveloped the place. When he entered, he felt dozens of eyes watching him. No one said a word until one of the members announced loudly, "There's a new comrade." For a few seconds, there was silence. Then several voices responded in unison, "Welcome, Comrade Enrique." That moment had a special meaning. The infiltration was complete. From that moment on, he stopped being just a sympathizer under observation and became Enrique, another member within the organization, and began his political and ideological training. He was taught the fundamentals of Marxism, the ideas of Lenin, Mao Zedong, and the so-called Gonzalo thought, as well as the internal rules that governed the party. One of them was repeated constantly, almost like a secret commandment. Never admit that you are a member of the party. Douglas Arteaga was no longer just Abadia. Now he was also Comrade Enrique, and he remained that way for several more months, deepening his infiltration, gaining more and more ground within an organization that gradually placed more and more trust in him, until one day his responsibilities within the party changed, and with them, so did the level of danger he was exposed to. Enrique was selected to join the environment of Giron Guanta 840. It wasn't just any assignment, but one of the main gathering centers for popular aid, the annihilation squads of Sendero Luminoso. At first glance, the place looked like just another alley in the upper neighborhoods, a housing complex where San Marcos students, newcomers from the provinces to Lima, and street vendors lived together. 8 of them were Donofrio ice cream vendors who roamed the streets trying to make a living. Everything seemed normal, but it was a tall facade, a setup to keep the real structure hidden. Once he settled in the Giron Guanta estate, Abadia began to systematically gather information to send to his superiors. What he discovered confirmed many of the intelligence service's suspicions. The place functioned as a center for meetings and celebrations, from chicken barbecues to birthdays, but that was only the surface. It also operated as a center for indoctrination and a popular school where the so-called Gonzalo thought was spread to ideologically train new members. However, its true importance was something else. It was an operations center, a place where ambushes, targeted killings, car bomb placements, and other actions aimed at spreading terror in Lima were planned. According to Abadia's reports, before each attack, the Shining Path members chosen for the operation would lock themselves in one of the rooms for 3 days, isolated, focused, finalizing logistical details before carrying out their attacks. It was a specially prepared environment. Room 102 inside. There was a ladder attached to the wall that led to a loft. There they had set up sub-beds for 8 people and an acrylic board for planning. For the intelligence agents, there was no doubt. The Quinta de Giron Guanta operated as a large barracks guarded from both inside and outside. In that setup, the fake ice cream vendors played a key role. They would spend hours near police stations or monitored areas, camouflaged on their Donofrio tricycles. They watched police movements, recorded routines, and discreetly monitored every detail. They even talked to officers without raising suspicion. Over time, Abadia began to approach them, as well as important figures like Luis Antonio Leon Borja, comrade Fabio. He was 32 years old, a student at San Marcos, and was hiding a long history of terrorism. According to police report number 2029 from Il Irero, dated April 23, 1986, he was captured along with 16 other members of a special selective annihilation detachment. His group was accused of killing police, stealing vehicles for attacks, and executing disabled victims. Shots in La Sienne. Shortly before meeting him in January 1991, comrade Fabio had been seen making senderista graffiti. The agents tried to execute him with a gunshot, but he survived. The party decided to shelter him on Gironguanta Street to help him recover. He lived next to Abadia. They became friends. Another friend he made was comrade Natalie, who was in charge of recruiting new members for the party. She was a regular participant in chicken raffles, neighborhood activities, and all kinds of social gatherings. Her goal was basically to recruit people, preferably quiet and resentful individuals. As she used to say, she had a natural talent for that job, and it was a very important one. The organization constantly needed new members. The fallen had to be replaced. Sometimes he accompanied her on her missions. No one imagined what they were really doing, but thanks to their infiltrator, the intelligence service had found out. However, the big discovery would come shortly after. It all began when Abadia met Comrade Joel, one of the leaders of the annihilation squads. He didn't live at the villa, but he visited it constantly. Over time, he managed to get close to him, earn his trust, and take part in some of his meetings. It was during one of those conversations that he heard something that would change the course of this story. Joel had taken part in the attack against the Hussars of Junin. The information reached the CIN and was quickly triangulated. They had already identified Joel and also the villa. It was the same place that, according to several testimonies, some suspects had hurriedly entered after the explosions that morning in June 1989. It was them. They were in that place. From the moment they reached that conviction, a plan began to take shape from the shadow. The Colina group had entered the equation. Vladimiro and his chain of command called it the Special Team, the result of a strategic restructuring within the defense apparatus equation team. Special, the result of a strategic restructuring within the state defense apparatus. The decision had been made. The rules of the game had to change under a simple but brutal premise. To defeat a terrorist organization, ruthless and clandestine, it was necessary to fight it on its own ground, to think like it, to move the same way, to descend to its level, and from there to respond with the same level of barbarity. It was time for the game to be played by the same rules for both players. In that context, Captain Santiago Martin Rivas proposed a strategy based on the principles of so-called low-intensity warfare. That is, he proposed implementing ambushes, sabotage, networks of informants, covert operations, and extrajudicial executions. A scheme where psychological impact played a central role. It was not only about eliminating targets, it also aimed to send a message to sow fear, to make the terrorists feel that they were not the only ones capable of operating from the shadows or of killing without mercy. Martin Rivas was convinced that this war would not be won through the judicial system, where many Shining Path members regained their freedom due to lack of evidence or procedural deficiencies. His logic was radical. Replacing judges with firing squads was to apply the law of retaliation, an eye for an eye, death for death. His proposal completely convinced Dimiro Montesinos, and the army's commanding general, whom he himself had promoted, Nicolás Hermosa Rios, also received the approval of the man who had given him such power, President Alberto Fujimori. Thus they gave the green light to a plan that dispensed with judicial guarantees and operated outside conventional military channels. Protection, supervision, and support of the operations no longer depended on the regular command structure, but rather on a much smaller yet more powerful circle, albeit an administrative one. Administratively, the group was attached to the Army Intelligence Service, or CIE. In practice, the Colina group never answered to that structure. Its true chain of command always lay with the National Intelligence Service, TIAL. It was the CIN that provided the funds for their operations, cash that was not recorded in any official accounting. It also supplied vehicles, weapons equipped with silencers. It's the necessary cover to prevent other state institutions, like the police or the public prosecutor's office, from interfering in their missions. And if the time came, they would protect them from being investigated, prosecuted, and judged. Of course, as long as they retained the necessary power to prevent it. With that backing, Captain Santiago Martin Rivas and Major Carlos Pichilingue assembled a detachment made up of 38 agents, 32 men and 6 women with extensive experience in the so-called emergency zones, had served in some of the bloodiest scenarios of the conflict, in hard-hit regions like Ayacucho and Alto Guayaba, spent years living among attacks, corpses, and scenes of extreme brutality. These experiences had changed them. They became accustomed to violence, normalized death, and harbored a deep resentment toward those responsible for everything they had witnessed. They were well-prepared individuals, but above all, they were deeply motivated. They were divided into 2 areas. The first was analysis and intelligence, responsible for processing the information obtained by undercover agents. They carried out surveillance, identified targets, reconstructed routines, and prepared operational files that would serve as the basis for future interventions. The second was the operations or execution area. Its members would be responsible for armed raids, kidnappings, interrogations, and the physical elimination of enemies. Contrary to what many would imagine, years later, the Colina group did not operate as a secret organization, hidden from the state apparatus. Their meetings were held inside the mechanics garage of the National Intelligence Service. Each member received special equipment, HK submachine guns equipped with silencers, G3 rifles, and beepers used as a location and communication system. Meanwhile, Martin Rivas, for his part, communicated through a cell phone, a technology that was uncommon in those years. It was a tool that bore the unmistakable mark of the sin. As we have revealed in previous stories, Vladimir Montesinos had a special fascination for cutting-edge technology. The training did not take long to begin. The chosen place was Latiza Beach in Pucuzana, an isolated military area that became the ideal laboratory to perfect instinctive shooting tactics, tracking, and night operations. But the real training went much further. Later testimonies would reveal a much deeper process, a gradual dehumanization where violence stopped being the exception and became routine, and killing had to stop being perceived as an extraordinary act. Part of this preparation didn't take place on the beaches of Pucuzana, but in the basements of the Pentagonito. While on the coast, they were perfecting their aim and operational capacity. Underground, they were refining methods of interrogation, torture, and making people disappear completely. Some members of the detachment also still arrived with experience in these kinds of practices. After all, the school of disappearance hadn't started with the Colina group. This is the most well-known. It happened in 1988 during the so-called Operation Lucero. On that occasion, Ecuadorian Captain Enrique Duchisela and Peruvian technician Marco Barrantes were absorbed into the clandestine circuits of the Army's intelligence service. There they suffered atrocities that are hard to imagine, and that would reveal the workings of some of the darkest methods used during the war against terrorism. But, well, that's a story that deserves to be told in detail and is already available on this channel. Would you like to watch Disappearance at the Pentagonito? Along with many other untold stories like the horror movie Fujimori Lived with His German Girlfriend, or Vladimiro's obsession with Jacqueline Beltran, or what happened to Hurtado Miller the day after announcing the shock, I invite you to become a member of the channel. This project is sustained thanks to the support of those who choose to back it in this way, making it possible for more stories like this to reach you. When the Colina group discovered that Jaironguanta 840 was the hideout of the leaders of Socorro Popular, responsible for the attack against the Hussars of Junin, that fateful morning of June 3, 1989, they thought they had found the perfect opportunity to settle that blood debt and send their message. Everything seemed to be ready, but then something unexpected happened, a miscoordination that would end up costing months. In June, agents from the Special Detective Brigade on DET, an operational unit of the police that reported directly to the CIN, they captured the senderista couple, Juan and Carmen Laurente, along with 4 other militants in an operation at 829 Jaironguanta, just a few meters from the house where Abadia was reporting from. The news spread quickly among the clandestine networks of Shining Path. The reaction was immediate. Meetings were suspended indefinitely, propaganda activities were halted, fundraising was interrupted, and the movement of many militants was restricted. The routine that for months had allowed their movements to be tracked was completely disrupted. The Shining Path members who used to frequent the place scattered to other outlying areas of Lima. That was the case with Comrade Joel. One of the most important pieces of the whole puzzle, that intervention by the Brede ended up sabotaging an infiltration that had been years in the making. Everything came to a halt. They were forced to keep a low profile and wait for months until things settled down. The one who didn't find that calm was Abadia. From that moment on, the most difficult stage of his entire undercover operation began. As a result of what happened, many members of Shining Path came to the conclusion that there was an infiltrator within the organization. And for some, the main suspect was precisely him, the new Comrade Enrique. But the problems didn't end there. Within the CIN, doubts about his loyalty also began to arise. Some agents started to notice that Abadia was withholding information and not reporting everything he knew. Things had changed radically. Until recently, he enjoyed the absolute trust of both sides. Now everyone distrusted him, and for a spy, few situations can be more dangerous than that. It's hard to know what was really going through his mind. Maybe not even he could understand it himself. After such a long and his identities begin to blur, could the boundaries be Douglas Arteaga? Was he Abadia? Or did he sometimes truly feel like Comrade Enrique? These are questions impossible to answer with certainty. The truth is that in the cold calculonymous with betrayal, many times it is elan trabajo, a defense mechanism for someone who understands that once the objective is delivered, their usefulness to the state apparatus ends, leaving them without a job and with their head exposed. Sino por superviven. At other times, the abyss of infiltration is so deep that people begin to get confused by, did he feel the way? Did he feel the way? Or was it because of ideology? In any case, Abadia managed to survive those months hiding in apartment 102, which he shared with Filomeno Leon, Comrade Jose. He was a man who also appeared in the army intelligence records because of his frequent visits to Castro prison, where he kept in contact with important Shining Path leaders. It had been confirmed that he carried out logistical liaison missions. Aware that his life depended en la que ni funcionet, Abadia focused all his efforts on gaining Filomeno's trust, and through him, reintegrating himself into daily life at the compound, and it worked. Gradually, he regained lost ground. His closeness to Comrade Jose helped dispel some of the suspicions surrounding him, and at the same time, allowed him to continue sending reports to the CIN. He needed to prove that he was still useful, that he could still produce information. The valuable one came when it finally arrived. His friend Filomeno was organizing a new gathering, like the ones they used to hold for Sendero Luminoso. These events were much more than just social gatherings. They were the perfect cover to bring together military personnel, establish contacts, exchange information, raise funds, and coordinate future operations without drawing attention, and at the same time celebrate everything in a single meeting. The next one was scheduled for October in a house located on El Pino Hill in La Victoria. The information provided by Abadia immediately mobilized the detachment. The moment to strike had arrived, but as soon as the agents began to enter the area, something caught their attention. The senderistas were watching the entrances disguised as shoe shiners and ice cream vendors. They detected the presence of strangers and took up defensive positions. They were alert, ready to react. The operation was cancelled before it began. Abadia reported that the raid ultimately had not taken place. Due to the suspicions, they decided to postpone. They moved her to a safer place, Girong Wanta 840. Right where Abadia lived was the setting. The Colina group knew best, which represented a decisive advantage they were not willing to waste, and they didn't. That Sunday, November 3, 1991, would be forever marked in the history of Peru. Starting at noon, the tenement began to fill with people, although many would not attend due to distrust. Other important targets had confirmed their presence. Among them was Comrade Joel. The music was loud. Ayacucho and Ancash Huaynos, entire families dancing inside the alley. There were two Chican Bien Había Mujeres y barbecues that day, a smaller family one on the second floor, and the main one on the first level, with about 40 people gathered, mostly men, although there were also women and some children. They talked, ate, toasted, laughed, and in the middle of all of them was Comrade Enrique, perfectly blended in among those who lived there. In his last hours, he pretended not to feel anxious, drank beer to hide his nerves, and wore a distinctive vest so the agents could recognize him without any problem. The Colina group gathered at Playa Latiza, received the order to move out at 5 in the afternoon. They headed to Girong Cangalo, half a block from the Lima Maternity Hospital. They parked 2 red Cherokee Jeeps and a white Mitsubishi. Martin Rivas sent agents Tuncar and Alvarado to confirm the area. On arrival, they found 2 surprises, not 1, but 2 chicken parties, which they hadn't known. The second was more concerning. Abadia was nowhere to be found. They immediately reported this to the Reds, who had that information. The second was more concerning. Abadia was nowhere to be found. Martin Rivas and his team searched for him. Which was the correct chicken party? Where did Abadia go? He sent agents, but where did Abadia vanish at such a crucial time? Both questions echoed among everyone during the time it took for him to show up. Apparently, he had gone out for a walk to clear his fears and sober up. The chicken party is on the 1st floor, he assured them, but he looked scared, very nervous. Go back to the party, Martin Rivas ordered him, furious with him, but with no intention of backing down. To avoid suspicion, they turned on the flashing lights of the trucks. The idea was to pretend to be police officers carrying out an official operation. It was 10:30 at night inside the gathering. Most of the attendees were drunk. Some had already left when Martin Rivas' order arrived. It was time to go in. The engines started. The trucks moved quickly toward 840. Girong Guanta. The arrival was so abrupt that one of the Cherokees slightly bumped into the white Mitsubishi. A curious boy approached when they got out. There was also a woman selling at the door. They were abruptly ordered to leave. They took some boxes out of the cars, and in a matter of seconds, they rushed in shouting, "Beer! The beer is here!" The surprised guests barely reacted. They couldn't understand what was happening. The agents opened the boxes. They took out the weapons. They screwed on the silencers. They put on ski masks. One of them turned up the music to cover up what was about to happen. Meanwhile, Abadia remained motionless. He watched the scene without moving until he finally reacted and tried to escape. But 2 agents intercepted him. "Don't go, man. You have to tell us who they are." Then he started pointing at people one by one. Martin Rivas nodded, approving the selection. After that, Abadia ran away. He left the house. Before it all happened, for some reason or maybe more than one, he didn't want to witness it. The agents started separating children and the elderly. They ordered them to go inside their houses. Some people on the 2nd floor balcony leaned out to see what was happening. Martin Rivas fired a short burst to scatter them, while Hector Gamara started shouting, "Get down on the floor, damn it!" Some obeyed, others tried to resist. Manuel Rios, one of the organizers of the gathering, tried to confront them, but Martin Rivas immediately responded with gunfire. It was then that the greatest and saddest tragedy of that night occurred. Noticing the conflict, Javier Rios, Manuel's 8-year-old son, instinctively ran toward him, frightened to see his father in danger. Unfortunately, the shots also hit his body and both died. Panic took over the place. To control it, the officers opened fire and struck those who tried to resist with the butts of their weapons. "Get on the ground, terrorists." Once subdued, Martin Rivas gave a new signal. Then the massacre began. The bursts of suppressed gunfire mixed with the loud huayno music and the screams of desperation. There were hundreds of shots. Some tried to escape, like Marcela Chumbipoma, who managed to run toward one of the corridors. She desperately knocked on a neighbor's door seeking help, but a burst of gunfire hit her and she fell. Others tried to fight back, like Tomas Livias, who had been wounded and was covered by the bodies of his siblings. A comrade tried to get up, grabbed a glass bottle, broke it, and tried to fight. According to testimonies, Martin Rivas mocked him and then fired his weapon at him. 27 shots hit his spine, arms, and head, but incredibly he survived. The massacre lasted about 10 minutes. Before leaving, the agents entered the room that Filomeno Leon shared with Abadia. There they found old copies of El Diario, the newspaper linked to Sendero Luminoso. They picked them up and threw them over the bodies. It was a mark, a way to seal the final message. After all, the operation was not only aimed at annihilating terrorists, it wasn't just revenge for the attack on the Hussars of Junin Ita. They wanted to send a message, one directed at the leadership of Shining Path, their operational members, and the support networks they had woven throughout various parts of Lima. They should no longer feel safe or protected. They could be found and eliminated at any moment, at any time, in any place. The rules of the game had changed, and now the state was willing to respond with the same level of barbarity, with the same lack of mercy. This was clearly reflected in the scene of terror that remained after the operation ended. The music had stopped. That message had been written in blood that spread throughout the alley. 15 people died. Several of them were close friends of Abadia, like Luis Antonio León Borja, Comrade Fabián, a 33-year-old San Marcos student, or Filomeno León, Comrade Jose, with whom he shared a room. Comrade Joel was not present. He confessed to participating in the attack against the Hussars of Junín. Many decided not to go or left early, and that's why they survived. Others managed to escape, and 4 were seriously injured, some with permanent disabilities, like Tomás Livias. For Martín Rivas, the operation, except for the death of the child, had been a total success. Worth celebrating. After midnight on La Tiza Beach, the Colina group gathered again. They entered the dining hall, they formed a circle and put their hands together in the center to shout in unison, "Win, win, win." Then they opened the beers and the celebration began. Coincidentally, it was Captain Santiago Martín Rivas's 34th birthday, so they had 2 big reasons to celebrate. At that moment, none of them doubted it. They felt proud, euphoric, convinced that they had bravely accomplished a mission that others would never have dared to carry out. From their perspective, what they had just done had saved hundreds of innocent lives. Civilians and even colleagues would have died in the coming months if it hadn't been for this successful and secret operation. They did not expect public recognition, tributes, or thanks. They trusted that history would one day understand their actions, that it would judge them as men who did what was necessary, brave, willing to do anything to bring peace back. That night, as they raised their first glasses and toasted, Martín Rivas's phone rang. It was Vladimiro Montesinos. The captain presented the final report. The operation had ended successfully. He didn't mention the death of the child. Montesinos received the news with satisfaction and conveyed his congratulations, along with those of President Alberto Fujimori. That reinforced the celebratory mood in Pucusana. Meanwhile, several kilometers away, at 840 Girón Guanta, things were very different. The terror and confusion seemed to be just beginning. The press arrived during the early morning and in the first hours of the following day. On November 4th, the newspapers were already reporting on the massacre. However, during the first days, the case was perceived as just another episode in a country accustomed to violence and fear. An alley, 15 dead, several injured, and an official version that did not fully clarify what had happened. But as new testimonies emerged, doubts began to arise. The flashing lights, the ski masks, the way they entered, the precision, how quiet the weapons were, the undercover agent, everything pointed to an operation carried out by a military or paramilitary group. For months, suspicions kept growing. However, the country continued moving forward amid blackouts and attacks. The war didn't allow time to process one massacre before the next one happened. The Colina group kept the same pace. The covert operations continued. One of the most significant happened 8 months and 15 days after the one in Barrios Altos. This time, it would be at the Enrique Guzmán Huibale National University of Education, better known as La Cantuta, where 9 students and a professor were taken from their dormitories during the early morning and never returned. For months, they also tried to cover up that story with silence, but in 1993, the secret began to crack. Testimonies, documents, leaks, and forensic findings ended up revealing the existence. The Colina group and its involvement in some of the most controversial episodes of the fight against terrorism in Peru. Years later, investigations and judicial proceedings would reach numerous members of the detachment, as well as those who held key positions within the chain of command. Santiago Martín Rivas, Nicolás Hermosa Ríos, Vladimiro Montesinos, and also Alberto Fujimori. Of course, all of this is part of another long story. The same is true of the case of Agent Douglas Arteaga, the infiltrator known as Abadia or Enrique the Traitor Comrade. Despite not being part of the Colina group or having participated directly in the murders, the court concluded that his intelligence work was decisive for the execution of the operation and therefore for the death of those people. Arteaga tried to defend himself in different ways. Perhaps his most important and insistent argument was that all the people identified at the Polada were Shining Path members. This is another one of those cases. Like many others, it deserves a story of its own. Behind the main story, there are usually subplots that due to time constraints can't be told in full. And in many cases, they end up being just as interesting as the main story. Very soon, several of them will be available in the premium segment of this channel. As you know, It tells stories that aren't very suitable for sponsorships or monetization rules, especially those that deal uncensored with sensitive topics like terrorism, but I believe it's important to tell them that way. If you like what's being told and the way the stories are built on this channel, I invite you to join for 8 sols a month and enjoy a lot of exclusive content. And if you want to take this support to the next level, you can become a sponsor of the channel with the new 40 sols membership, which also includes much more personalized benefits. Thank you from the bottom of my heart to everyone who is part of this community and allows me to keep telling more stories like this. Before closing this story, I would like to say that the Barrios Altos Massacre was one of the most brutal episodes in the fight against terrorism in Peru, carried out by the state. But it's also important to remember that from the terrorist ranks, even more numerous attacks and massacres were carried out, bloodier and mainly directed at the most vulnerable. That's why there's a difference in the compensation granted to the victims. They sparked debates that continue to this day, since the families of those who died in Barrios Altos received reparations ordered by the Inter-American Court of Human Rights, HATANORIS. These included high financial compensation, healthcare, access to education, and other. While thousands of Peruvians who lost their families at the hands of Shining Path and the MRTA were included in state programs, whose financial compensation turned out to be considerably lower, limited, delayed, and insufficient. The difference was hard to accept. Thousands felt, and still feel to this day, like second-class victims, and the Barrios Altos case was not simple at all. Beyond the verdicts, the reparations, and the ideological positions, which continue to spark debate more than 35 years later, it remains a story shrouded in a thick fog. It's hard to know for sure everything that really happened that night. There are more than 53,000 pages filled with testimonies, statements, expert reports, and accounts that continue to contradict each other to this day. To these are added political interests, ideological interpretations, and the passage of time, which have ended up turning Barrios Altos into one of the most debated and controversial episodes in Peru's recent history. However, after extensive research in specialized literature, which I will leave in the description, there are two things that are completely clear to me. Two truths that survive among all the contradictions. The first is that at 840 Girón Guanta, there were indeed terrorists and collaborators of Shining Path operating there. Even though for many years they have claimed otherwise, the evidence is overwhelming. The second truth is that innocent people also died that night. The death of Javier Rios, who was only 8 years old, it proves it in the most painful and irrefutable way. Based on these two truths, everyone can form their own judgment and verdict about what the Barrios Altos case meant. I would like to read yours in the comments. Thank you very much for making it this far. If you like this story, please subscribe. See you in the next one. Goodbye.